You don't really understand how much of yourself is tied up in something as simple as your hair until you wake up and realize someone took it from you while you were asleep. I open my eyes to the soft morning light in my own living room, the TV still humming low, the blanket half slid off my legs. It should have been an ordinary Monday. Instead, the first thing I registered was the cold air on the back of my neck. My hand went up automatically, the way it had every morning for the last 40 years, ready to smooth my long gray hair out of my face. My fingers closed on nothing, just jagged ends. Tufts, uneven clumps, where there should have been a heavy, familiar weight. For a second, my brain refused to catch up. Then I saw it. Chunks of my hair scattered on the rug like someone had emptied a dustpan. Silver strands tangled in a pair of scissors lying open on the coffee table. Have you ever had a moment where your mind is still looking for a reasonable explanation while your stomach already knows the truth? I sat up slowly, heart pounding, my hand shaking as it moved over my scalp, feeling the hack job of it. Short here, long there, almost bald in one patch like a cruel joke. Across the room, leaning against the doorway with a mug in her hand, was my daughter-in-law. She wasn't crying. She wasn't horrified. She was smirking. "Good morning," she said, taking a sip. "You finally woke up." My throat went dry. What happened?" I managed. My voice didn't even sound like mine. It sounded small. That seemed to please her. She nodded toward the floor. "You were snoring so loud last night, you kept us up," she said casually. "We figured we'd help you out. All that long hair at your age, it's ridiculous. You look like you're trying to compete with me. Now you'll learn your place." Learn my place in my own house, with hair I'd grown and cared for through every heartbreak and bill and lonely night of raising her husband by myself. I looked at her, really looked, and saw no shame at all, just satisfaction. That little smirk older women know too well, the one younger women wear when they think they finally knocked you down a peg. I was still reeling when I heard his footsteps. My son, my baby, the reason I'd worked double shifts and gone without new clothes for a decade. He walked in from the kitchen, tying the belt on his robe, eyes going straight to my head. For a heartbeat, I saw something like shock flash there. I thought, this is it. He's gonna stand up for me. He's gonna say, "What did you do to my mother?" Instead, his jaw tightened. He looked at his wife, then at me, and shook his head. "Mom," he said, like he was scolding a child, "you warned you. You keep disrespecting my wife, acting like you run everything. You needed a lesson." Have you ever felt your heart drop so fast you could hear it in your ears? I stared at him, words stuck behind my teeth. "A lesson?" I repeated. "In my sleep?" He shrugged, crossing his arms. "You talk about her behind her back. You correct her in front of people. You make little comments about how she dresses, how she cooks. You still introduce people to my house like we're guests here. She tried to talk to you. You didn't listen. Maybe this will make you think before you open your mouth next time." Behind him, my daughter-in-law smiled wider. "Besides," she added. It was time. You're his mother, not his girlfriend. Grow up. In that moment, sitting there with my butchered hair and my own son backing the woman who done it, I realized something colder than the air on my neck. They didn't see me as the woman who held this family together anymore. They saw me as the problem, the obstacle, the old lady whose opinions were in the way of their new life. And they thought they had the right to put their hands on me, on my body, because they were teaching me. Have you ever been humiliated in your own living room and told you deserved it? Have you ever looked at your child and thought, I raised you to be better than this, and heard them say with their actions, we don't care? I wanted to scream, to grab those scissors and show her what lessons felt like. I wanted to curse him, tell them both to get out of my house, out of my life. Instead, I felt my mother's voice rise up from somewhere deep inside me, the way it always did when I was about to let my temper write a check my future couldn't cash. Don't waste your power on yelling. Use the power they forgot you have. So I swallowed hard. I pulled my hand away from my head. I blinked back the tears burning behind my eyes because I'd be damned if I gave her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I said, all right, if that's how you both feel, I understand. My son frowned, thrown off by how calm I sounded. Mom, don't start with the drama, he said. Just think about it next time you disrespect her. I will, I replied. I stood up, my knees popping, my scalp raw, and walked to my room without another word. They watched me go, already triumphant, convinced their little stunt had put me in my place. What they didn't know, what I didn't say as I closed my door and locked it, was that the only lesson anyone learned that morning was me. I learned exactly where I stood in their eyes, and I learned that if they thought cutting my hair while I slept was the worst thing they could do to me, they had no idea what I was capable of with 3 days, a lawyer, and a deed with my name on it.
You don't get to 60-something with a grown son and a half-paid-off house without collecting a few things that feel like they're yours and yours alone. For me, that list was short. My name on the deed, my recipes, and my hair. Everything else in my life had been negotiated, sacrificed, or shared for somebody else's benefit. My son didn't see that part, of course. To him, I'd always just been Mom, the one who made things appear. Food, school supplies, clean clothes, like magic. He never saw the back of my hands raw from scrubbing at the diner after my day shift at the office, or the nights I'd braided my own hair on the edge of the tub because I couldn't afford a salon, but refused to let go of the one thing that made me feel like myself. I'd had long hair since I was a girl. When his father left, it was the only thing that didn't change. Men came and went, bills came and went, apartments came and went. My hair was there in every photo. Thick and dark when he was a baby, shot with silver when he walked across that high school stage. I cut corners in every other part of my life. I bought thrift store dresses and second-hand shoes, but my hair was always washed, oiled, combed, and put back in a way that made me feel like I hadn't completely disappeared behind everybody else's needs. When he was little and the world was just me and him, he'd nestle against that hair on the couch, tiny hand grabbing a handful while I read to him. "You're so pretty, Mama," he used to say in that guileless way kids have when they still see you as the center of their universe. I held on to those words through a lot of years when nobody else was saying anything kind to me. I poured everything into raising him. I was 22 when his father decided commitment wasn't for him and walked out with a trash bag of clothes and a muttered, "You'll manage." He wasn't wrong. I did manage. But managing looks different when you're working reception by day, cleaning offices by night, and trying to be both parents on the weekends. I took extra shifts so he wouldn't have to know what it felt like to open a fridge to nothing but condiments. I learned how to stretch rice and beans 6 ways. I learned how to sew his Halloween costumes when other moms bought theirs. When the landlord raised the rent one year and I thought we were going to lose the apartment, I picked up a 3rd gig doing hair in my kitchen for neighborhood ladies on Sundays. Funny, isn't it? That the same hands that learned to honor other women's hair with care would one day wake up to their own butchered for spite. As he grew, I tried to loosen my grip little by little. I didn't want to be that mother who lives through her son, who clings so tight he can't breathe. I encouraged him to go away for college, even when it broke my heart a little to see his room empty. I co-signed his first car loan when no one else would, told him, "Don't make me regret this," and watched him drive out of my driveway like he was heading into a future I'd never had. He came back different, like they all do. Taller, a little straighter, opinions honed by professors and friends instead of just me. I was proud. I was also aware. Aware of the new distance in his eyes when I mispronounced some new app he liked. Aware of the way he sighed when I asked about things that seemed simple to him now. Aware of how quickly "Thanks, Mom" turned into "I got it" whenever I tried to help. But that's how it's supposed to be, I told myself. You raise them to leave. You don't raise them to be your little boy forever. When he brought her home for the first time, the woman who would become my daughter-in-law, I did what mothers do. I put on my best dress, fussed with my hair, made a table full of food. I watched them sit too close on my couch and talk in half sentences, laughing at memories I wasn't part of. She was pretty, bold, the kind of young woman who never has to wonder if people notice when she walks into a room. Long lashes, sharp cheekbones, hair done just right. The first words out of her mouth about me, though, were something like, "Wow, your mom looks young. You didn't tell me she still has all this hair." She said it like it was a compliment. The way her eyes flicked over me made it feel like an assessment. I shrugged it off at the time, chalked it up to generational differences. "Thank you," I said. "It's been with me through a lot." The wedding was small but beautiful. I helped where I could, paid for flowers, slipped him some extra cash when the DJ wanted a deposit. I pinned my hair up that day, not wanting to draw attention, telling myself, this is their moment. In the photos, I'm off to the side. He's grinning, she's glowing. I was honestly happy for them. When their first attempt to buy a place fell through, bad inspection, shady seller, they were devastated. They'd already given notice on their rental. "We don't know what we're going to do, Mom," he said, rubbing the back of his neck at my kitchen table. I looked around my little house, the one I'd scraped and sacrificed for, the one with 3 bedrooms and just me rattling around in it, and heard myself say, "You can stay here, just for a while, save up again. No sense you paying strangers when you have a roof here." His face lit up. He hugged me like he was 5 again. "Really, Mom? You're the best, Mom." At the time, it felt like the right thing. What else are you working and worrying all your life for if not to make it easier on your kids when you can? I told myself it would be temporary. 6 months, maybe a year, long enough for them to catch their breath. The first week was almost fun. The house was full again. Laughter, 2 extra pairs of shoes by the door, the smell of new recipes wafting out of my own kitchen as she experimented. I moved some of my things around to make room, ceded the master bedroom to them when he said, "You know, my back is bad, Mom. That old mattress in your room is better." I told myself I didn't mind moving into the smaller bedroom. I've had that big bed long enough. Time for change. Slowly, what started as them staying with me turned into we all live here, turned into this is our house. Subtle at first. Her calling the kitchen my kitchen when she told people about a new recipe. Him saying, "We're hosting this year," about holidays like I was the one invited. I heard it. I swallowed it. If there's one thing single mothers are good at, it's telling ourselves we're overreacting when our kids' needs brush up against our boundaries. The hair came up early. One night, we were all watching TV and a commercial came on with an older model, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. "She looks like you, Mom," my son said. Before I could smile, my daughter-in-law snorted. "Except your mom's hair is even longer. Honestly, you should cut it. Long hair is for girls. You'd look more appropriate with something shorter." "My hair, my choice," I said lightly. "Been that way since before either one of you were born." She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. "Okay, fine," she said. "Just saying, it sends a message." That was the first time I thought, message to who? And why do you care who thinks what about my head? As the months went on, those little comments multiplied. "You're really gonna wear it down to church? People might think you're trying too hard. Maybe if you cut it, you'd look more like a sweet grandma, not like you're trying to compete." My son would chuckle awkwardly or stay silent. Never once did he say, "That's enough," the way I wish he had. I didn't realize then that my hair had become a symbol to her. In her eyes, I think it represented all the ways I hadn't retired from my own life just because my son got married. I still had opinions. I still hosted. I still introduced people to my house. I still wore my hair the way I liked, not the way society or she thought a woman my age should. There were other frictions too, of course. Clashes over cooking. "We don't eat that much salt, Mom." Over cleaning. "We like the counters clear." Over traditions. "We're starting our own." Each one a tiny tug at the thread of who I'd always been in my own home. I bit where I could. I bit my tug more than I spoke. I kept telling myself it was growing pains, that we'd find a rhythm. But every time I walked by a mirror and saw that long gray curtain down my back, I'd think, at least there's one thing in this house that's still mine. I didn't realize until I woke up on that couch with my scalp stinging and hair on the floor that she'd clocked that too, that in all the little ways she was trying to rearrange me, that was the one she couldn't reach while I was awake. So she waited until I was asleep.
And my son, the boy who used to wind that hair around his fingers to fall asleep himself, decided that instead of defending me, he'd call it a lesson. That was when half a lifetime of swallowing things for his sake finally hit the back of my throat and refused to go down anymore. Your 3 days between waking up on that couch and sitting in my lawyer's office were the longest of my life. And not because of the hair. The hair was just the part I could see in the mirror. The real wound was the shift in the house. The new way every word they said to me came wrapped in the knowledge that they'd already decided I was someone they could lay hands on and humiliate. That morning, after I walked out of the living room, they didn't follow me. I closed my bedroom door, turned the lock, and just stood there staring at myself. Every time I moved, a hacked-off strand fell from my shoulders like confetti after a party I hadn't agreed to attend. My first instinct was to fix it, to grab scissors and try to even it out, to make it presentable before anyone else saw. Old habits die hard. Years of cleaning up other people's messes will do that to you. Then, I stopped. Why was I rushing to cover up what they'd done? So they could tell themselves it wasn't that bad? So my son could kiss my forehead that night and pretend it had all blown over? I put the scissors down, I washed my face, put on fresh clothes, and tied a scarf around my head. Not to hide, but to keep the bits from falling in my eyes while I thought. When I finally opened my door to go to the kitchen for coffee, I walked into a wall of tension. They were both at the table, mid-whisper. Whatever they were saying died the second they saw me. Tiffany's eyes flicked to the scarf, then back to my face, searching for tears. My son wouldn't quite meet my gaze. "Morning," I said evenly, heading for the coffee maker. The pot was empty. Normally, I'd have sighed, rinsed it, made a new one. That day, I just filled a mug with water from the tap, put it in the microwave, and stood there, back to them, listening. "So, are we going to talk about last night?" Tiffany asked finally, voice bright and brittle. "What about it?" I replied, not turning around. "You crossed a line, Mom," my son said, latching onto the opening like he'd been rehearsing. "You embarrassed her again at dinner. You knew she was sensitive about the job thing, and you still had to make that little comment." I thought back to the night before, to a simple remark I had made about when I was your age, I was already working 2 jobs, which in my mind was about work ethic, not an attack. In hers, it had landed as, "You're lazy." I told the truth about my life. If that makes somebody uncomfortable, maybe they should ask themselves why. Tiffany scoffed. "You always do this. Make these little digs and then act innocent. We can't even eat in peace without you reminding us how hard you had it. Sorry our life doesn't live up to your tragic backstory." "Tragic backstory?" I repeated, turning to face her. "That backstory is the reason your husband is standing here instead of in some halfway house or foster care. That backstory paid for the roof over your head right now. You cut my hair while I slept because your feelings were hurt at dinner? Do you hear how childish that sounds?" Her cheeks flushed. "Excuse me for not wanting to feel like a guest in my own house." "Your house," I corrected quietly. "This is my house. You were invited." My son slammed his palm on the table. "See?" he said to her, as if I weren't there. "This is what I mean. She can't let it go. Always has to pull the my house, my rules card." He looked at me. "We live here too, Mom. We pay bills, we do chores. You can't keep throwing my house in our face every time you don't get your way." Something inside me that had been soft for years for his sake hardened a notch. "I don't mention it every time," I said, "but maybe I should have if you're this confused about who gave who a place to land." "Oh my God," Tiffany muttered. "This is exactly why I did what I did. You don't listen when we talk. You only understand big gestures. Cutting my hair without my consent is assault, not a gesture. If I did that to you in your sleep, you'd call the police." "Oh, you're being dramatic," she said. "It's just hair. It'll grow back. Maybe in the meantime, you'll learn not to talk to me any kind of way in front of my husband." My husband, my son, as if I hadn't had any claim on him before she put a ring on his finger. The main conflict became crystal clear in that conversation. In their eyes, the hierarchy in the house had shifted. Wife first, husband next, and me, somewhere underfoot, to be managed when I stepped out of line. That day set a new tone. They stopped pretending so hard. Little courtesies disappeared. Tiffany stopped knocking before coming into my room to borrow things. One afternoon, I found my favorite casserole dish in their room being used to hold his gym socks. "We're running out of storage," she said when I confronted her, shrugging. "Maybe if you got rid of some of your old junk, there'd be space for our life here." "My junk is the only reason this house was paid down enough for you to move in. You want more space? Maybe you should be looking for your own place instead of rearranging mine." That set off another argument, my son swooping in to play referee, but always with the same refrain. "Mom, you have to stop undermining her. She feels like you don't respect her. She's my wife. I have to have her back." "Who had your back before she came along?" I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I watched. I listened. I realized that every time there was a choice between me and her, he picked her. Not just in arguments, but in small ways. If I asked for help bringing groceries in, he'd say, "Ask Tiffany." If I suggested a meal, she'd veto it, and he'd say, "We're trying to eat different now, Mom. Times change." If I mentioned how much it hurt to lose my hair like that, he'd respond, "At least you're healthy. Lots of people have bigger problems." That was the main conflict in a nutshell. The woman who carried him and the woman who now shared his bed, and his belief that defending one required diminishing the other. Underneath the drama, a quieter battle raged in me. The part that wanted to cling, to keep him under my roof no matter what, and the part that knew if I didn't draw a line now, I'd spend whatever years I had left being chipped away at by people who thought they were entitled to reshape me. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in my small bedroom, hear them laughing late in the living room I used to have to myself, hear the clink of glasses, the low hum of their shows, and the occasional, "Don't tell Mom, she'll freak out," and feel like a ghost in my own house. Once I overheard Tiffany on the phone with a friend complaining. "We're living with his mom right now. Yeah, she's nice enough, but she acts like it's still hers. Constant commentary. You'd think with her age she'd be grateful." Grateful for being disrespected in the one place I broke myself to afford? The morning after the haircut, one of my neighbors dropped by with a cake, not knowing anything had happened. When she saw my butchered hair under the scarf, her eyes widened. "Girl, what happened to you?" she blurted. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my daughter-in-law stiffen. My son froze. I could have told the truth right there. I could have pulled off the scarf and said, "Ask the two people you keep praising for taking care of me what they did." But I saw the flash of panic on Tiffany's face, the way my son's jaw tensed, and my anger suddenly cooled into something sharper. "Got a little tired of carrying that all around," I lied smoothly, patting my head. "Figured I'd try something new." "Bold," my neighbor said, not entirely convincing. "I always loved your long hair." "Hair grows," I replied. "Respect doesn't once you cut it." When she left, Tiffany rounded on me in the hall. "Why didn't you tell her?" she hissed. "If you're so traumatized, why not get the whole street on your side?" "Because I'm not like you," I said. "I don't need an audience for my lessons." For a beat, we just glared at each other. My son stepped between us. "Enough for me," he said to me. "You're making this worse. Can't you just let it go and move on? You're holding on to hair like it's life or death." "It was my decision to make," I shot back. "You don't have to understand why it mattered. You just have to understand you had no right." "And you have no right to disrespect my wife in our house," he snapped. There it was again. Our house. That was when the conflict stopped being about hair or one cruel night and became about ownership, of space, of history, of the story we were telling about who owed what to whom. In every argument that followed, that line came up. Our house, our rules. You live with us now, Mom. You can't keep acting like the boss.
Each time I'd silently walk into the kitchen, open the drawer where I kept the mortgage paperwork, and run my finger over my name. The bank hadn't seen fit to change it to ours, neither had the county records. They wanted to teach me my place, but they'd conveniently forgotten I'd built the place they were standing in. The main conflict, then, wasn't whether my reaction matched their idea of the crime. It was whether I was going to accept their version of reality.
That I was some overbearing old woman freeloading in her son's marital home, or whether I was going to stand in the truth that I was a woman who had bloodied her hands so her son could stand tall, and that I had every right to decide who shared my walls. The more they pushed, the clearer it became. I could stay quiet and keep a piece of him under my roof at the cost of my dignity, or I could risk losing the little everyday closeness we had left to protect the woman who'd gotten him there. At night, as I unwrapped my scarf and stared at the uneven shorn hair growing out of my scalp, I realized something else. They thought the hair was the only thing tying me to my younger self. They forgot I still had her spine. Your real turning point wasn't the night they cut my hair. It was the morning after, when I went to the drawer where I keep all the important papers, not to comfort myself with the sight of my name on the deed, but to ask a different question. If they see me as this small in a house that's legally mine, what would they do if it wasn't? What would my life look like if I actually chose myself for once, instead of choosing my son over and over until there was nothing left of me but gray hair on the floor? I laid it all out on my bed. The mortgage statement stamped paid, the deed with my name, the copy of the will I drafted 10 years ago when he was still my baby in my mind, and I'd written everything to my son without a second thought. Looking at that paper with fresh eyes, I realized I'd set the table for exactly the kind of entitlement they were now eating off of. I'd handed him the house, the savings, everything, on the assumption that gratitude would come built in. That was my mistake. Entitlement isn't written by lawyers. It's written in the 1,000 little ways you teach people what they can get away with. I stared at those documents with my butchered hair tucked under a scarf and thought, I taught him I'd do anything for him. I never taught him there were things I wouldn't do. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I picked up the phone and called someone for help who wasn't family. Hi, this is Maria, I said when my lawyer's receptionist answered. I need to make some urgent changes to my estate plan. And I need to know what my rights are if the people living in my house have forgotten whose house it is. She squeezed me in that same afternoon. I told my son I had a doctor's appointment, so I wouldn't have to endure Tiffany's commentary about old people and their checkups. He barely looked up from his phone. Okay, Mom, don't be late. We're having friends over for dinner, as if I were the one who needed to clear my schedule with them. I sat on the bus to the lawyer's office with my scarf on and my hands clenched in my lap, feeling half ridiculous and half like I was on my way to do something sacred. In the waiting room, all the other clients looked put together. Nice suits, styled hair. I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of a framed certificate and almost turned around. The part of me that had been raised to be nice whispered, "You're overreacting. It's only hair. Don't blow up your family over this." But then I heard my son's voice in my head, clear as a bell, "You needed a lesson, Mom." And my daughter-in-law's, sugar sweet and sharp as glass, "Now you learn your place." I straightened my back and waited. When my lawyer came out, she didn't flinch at the scarf or the new tension in my shoulders. She just shook my hand and said, "You said urgent. Tell me what happened." I told her everything. Not just the haircut, but the months of small disrespect that led to it. The jokes about my age, the way they talked about our house, the way my son had started treating me like a roommate he barely tolerated instead of the woman who'd given him life. I told her about waking up to hair on the floor and my own child co-signing the violation. Saying it out loud hurt, but it also turned the fog into something solid. When I was done, she sat back, fingers steepled. She said, "Legally, this is very simple. The house is yours. The mortgage is in your name only. You have no legal obligation to let them live with you at all, let alone for free." "I know that on paper," I said, "but he's my son. And he is your mother, not your doormat, not his safety net forever. You asked me about your rights. Your rights are to decide who lives in your home, to decide who gets your assets when you die, and to change your mind if the people you were planning to bless show you they don't see you as a blessing." She flipped through my file, pulled out the will we'd drafted years ago. She said, "Right now," she tapped it, "everything goes to him. House, savings, whatever life insurance pays out. If you died tomorrow, your daughter-in-law would benefit from all of it through him." The old me had taken comfort in that once. The me sitting in her office with hacked-off hair and a knot of resentment in my gut felt something else. Anger at my own naivete. I said, "I want to change it." The words came out steadier than I felt. "I want my other kids to have their share. I want some put aside for the grandbabies directly. I want some to go to the church pantry that helped us when my son was little. And I want it written in black and white that he is not entitled to this house by default." She nodded, already jotting notes. She said, "We can do that. We can create a trust that takes care of you while you're alive and directs funds to the places you name after. We can put in specific bequests to each child, each grandchild. And we can leave your son a portion, or none at all, as you choose." "I don't want to cut him off completely," I admitted, surprising myself. "I don't want to be petty. I need him to understand that there are consequences, that I am not obligated to finance my own humiliation." "We can leave him something modest," she offered. "Enough that you're not erasing him, but not so much that he can keep acting like the heir to the throne." We spent the next 2 hours rearranging my legacy like furniture, sliding weight away from the corner where entitlement had taken root and back toward the people and places that had actually held me up. We also talked about the house in the present, not just the future. If you want them out, you are within your rights to give them notice. They are not tenants with a lease. They are guests who've overstayed. Legally, you can ask them to leave. It might be messy emotionally, but the law is clear. "I don't want to see them on the street. I'm not him." Then you give them time, 30 days, 60. You put it in writing so there's no confusion, and you stick to it. On the bus ride home, the scarf on my head felt less like shame, more like a symbol, like the old stories where a woman cuts her hair before going into battle. I walked into my house differently that day, not hunched, not apologetic, but with the quiet knowledge that the ground under all of us had shifted, even if they didn't know it yet. In the next 3 days, I did 3 very specific things. Day 1, I went to a real salon. I took off the scarf, let the stylist cluck and gasp, and then I watched in the mirror as she turned the hack job into a sharp, short cut that framed my face and made me look not younger, but more like myself again. I chose the style, no one else. When I came home, Tiffany's eyes widened. For a split second, she looked thrown. The damage she meant to be a constant reminder of her power had become something I owned. Day 2, I met with my pastor and told him, in gentle terms, that my living situation was changing and I might need some help moving some things soon. Not gossip, logistics, setting up another layer of support that didn't run through my son. Day 3, the new will was signed, notarized, and placed in my lawyer's safe. Copies went into a fireproof box under my bed and into my eldest daughter's hands. Only then did I print out the notice I'd drafted with my lawyer's help. A simple letter stating that as of 60 days from that date, Mark and Tiffany were to vacate my home, that any future arrangement would have to be negotiated, and that until then, we'd live as respectfully as possible under the same roof. I folded that paper and slid it into a manila folder with their names on it. As I did, I realized the turning point had already happened inside me. 3 days earlier, they had stood over me and declared, "You needed a lesson, Mom," as if I were some misbehaving child. What they didn't understand is that those words had landed, just not the way they intended. I had needed a lesson in my own power, in the difference between love and obligation, and in the fact that it wasn't too late to redraw the lines in a house I'd paid for. By the time I called them into the living room on that third evening, my hair neat, my folder ready, the old mom, who would have cried and begged them to be nicer, was gone. In her place was the woman I'd been before motherhood consumed me, the one who signed mortgage papers alone, who kept lights on with tips, who chose herself at least once in order to have a son to choose later. They thought cutting my hair was the climax of the story. They thought my silence was defeat. They had no idea it was the quiet you hear right before a storm changes direction.
3 days after I woke up with my hair on the floor, I asked them to meet me in the living room. No yelling, no banging on doors, just, "Mark, Tiffany, can you both come in here a minute?" My voice was so even that I saw them relax a little when they walked in. In their minds, 3 days of me not bringing it up meant it had blown over. They saw the new cut, short, shaped, silver against my cheekbones, and I could see Tiffany file away a little satisfaction that her lesson had stuck. She didn't know I'd chosen this cut myself, at a salon she couldn't afford yet. My son sat on the far end of the couch, arms folded. She perched next to him. I stayed in my usual armchair, a manila folder on my lap. For a moment, nobody spoke. I let the silence sit. "So," my son finally said, glancing at the folder, "are we doing this again? Because I really thought we'd move past the hair thing." That was my first clue about just how little he understood what had happened. "We're not here to talk about hair," I said. "We're here to talk about respect, and about this house, and about the future." Tiffany's jaw tightened. "Oh, here we go," she muttered. "Another lecture. This will be my last one, because after today, I won't have to say any of this again." I opened the folder and pulled out the deed, laid it on the coffee table between us so they could both see the name at the top. Mine. "You know what this is," I said. Mark rolled his eyes a little. "Yes, Mom, we know," he said. "It's your house. We've heard it 1,000,000 times." "Have you?" I asked. "Because the way you've been talking and acting lately, I wasn't sure." Tiffany huffed. "We know it's technically in your name," she said, emphasizing technically in a way that made my teeth itch. "But we live here too. We pay utilities. We help. We're building a life." "And I invited you to do that," I said. "I opened my home to you because I love my son, and I wanted you two to have a foundation. I wanted you to get to a place where you could stand on your own and look back at this time as a blessing, not a right." I slid the deed aside and pulled out the old will, tapped the first line. 10 years ago, when I signed this, I left everything to you," I told my son. "The house, the savings, everything. Because in my mind, you were still the little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap. I assumed that no matter who you married, you'd never forget who built the ground you're standing on." His eyes flicked down, then away. Tiffany shifted uncomfortably. "Okay," he said slowly. And, I went on, 3 days ago, I woke up in my own living room, in my own house, with my hair hacked off my head. I listened to my daughter-in-law tell me I needed to learn my place. I listened to my son agree that I needed a lesson. I watched their faces as they replayed those words.
heard them from outside their own mouths for the first time. I needed a lesson for what? I asked softly. For telling the truth about my life? For reminding you whose name is on that deed? For shrinking myself into the corner of a house I paid for so you could feel bigger in it? You humiliated her at dinner, Mark blurted. You've been doing it for months. She cut my hair in my sleep. That's not a boundary. That's a violation. And you stood there and called it a lesson. I let that hang between us, then reached back into the folder and pulled out a second, cleaner document. So I learned that the people I was planning to entrust everything to do not see me as someone worth basic physical respect. I learned that the woman who calls me mom with her mouth and that old lady on the phone to her friends cannot be trusted not to spit on my name once I'm gone. And I learned that my son, who I have bent myself into 1,000 shapes for, will side with anyone who makes his life easier, even if it makes mine smaller. That's not a lesson I enjoy, but it's one I won't ignore. I laid the new will on the table next to the old one. This, I said, tapping it, is my new estate plan. Signed, witnessed, filed. Mark frowned, confusion flickering into worry. What did you do? He asked. I did what I should have done a long time ago. I spread things out. Your sisters now have equal shares. Your nieces and nephews have trusts in their names. A portion is going straight to the food pantry that helped us when you were a baby, and I had more month than money. You are still in here, I pointed to a modest bequest, but you are no longer everything. That ship sailed the moment you decided your wife's ego mattered more than my dignity. Tiffany inhaled sharply. You're punishing us over a haircut? Do you know how crazy that sounds? I'm correcting a mistake over a pattern. The haircut was just the part even you couldn't pretend was accidental. Before she could fire back, I pulled out the last piece of paper, the letter. And this, I continued, is a formal notice that 60 days from now, you will no longer be living in this house. The room went absolutely still. What? My son said, like he'd misheard. You're kicking us out? I am asking you to do what grown married people are supposed to do. Build your own home, in your own space, with your own rules. You have 2 full months to find a place. Save your money. Make a plan. I'll even pay first month's rent for you somewhere else, because I'm not interested in seeing you homeless. But in 60 days, you will not be waking up under this roof. The paper trembled slightly in my fingers, not from fear, but from the weight of finally saying it out loud. Tiffany shot to her feet, face blazing. You can't do that, she screamed. We left our apartment because you begged us to live here. No, I said calmly. You left because your lease was up and your application for that townhouse got denied. I offered, you accepted. This arrangement had no end date on paper because I trusted you to know when it was time to move on. You've shown me you do not, so I'm putting one in writing. My son was still sitting, but his face had gone slack, the color draining. Mom, he said, voice breaking for the first time, be serious. We don't have the money to move like that. Rents out there are insane. We've been saving assuming... He stopped himself, but the truth dangled there anyway. Assuming that was Assuming what? I pressed. That I'd die on schedule and hand you the keys like a prize? That this was our forever home, he finished weakly. You promised you'd always take care of me. I did take care of you. For 30+ years. I am still taking care of you, giving you far more notice and help than any landlord would. But taking care of you never meant sacrificing every last piece of myself. It never meant letting you and your wife teach me lessons in my sleep. Something in him crumbled then. The bravado that had let him stand in that doorway and tell me I needed a lesson melted away. And what was left was the scared, selfish part, afraid of bills and adulthood without a safety net. He slid off the couch onto his knees in front of my chair, hands outstretched. "Mom, please," he said, voice thick. "Don't do this. Don't kick us out. I was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. She shouldn't have. I wasn't thinking. We were stressed. You know how money's been. Don't change everything over one mistake." Tiffany, seeing his fear, dropped down too, clutching at my blanket. The same hands that had held scissors to my hair were now grasping for mercy. "I'm sorry," she babbled. "I went too far, okay? I was hurt. You were hurt. I shouldn't have done."
I'll never touch you again. I'll never touch your stuff. Just please don't ruin our lives over this. There it was. The kneeling, the begging the thumbnail text promised. And I would be lying if I said there wasn't a small, wounded part of me that felt a flicker of satisfaction seeing them finally understand there were stakes. But over that, louder, was a quieter voice. Don't confuse remorse with fear of consequences. Remorse says, I hurt you, and that pains me. Fear of consequences says, I'm scared of what your reaction will cost me. I took a breath. Get up, I said. I don't need you on your knees. I needed you on my side 3 days ago when I woke up violated in my own house. That moment has passed. They hesitated, then obeyed, returning to the couch like chastened children. I'm not ruining your lives, I continued. I am forcing you to live them, like adults, with rent and neighbors, and the awareness that when you do cruel things to people, sometimes they leave, sometimes they close doors, sometimes they change wills. So there's nothing we can say to change your mind? My son asked, tears sliding down his cheeks. You're really going to throw away your relationship with me over this? I am not throwing you away, I said, the lump back in my throat. I am moving you out. Those are not the same thing. You will always be my son. You will not always be my dependent. 60 days from now, if you want a relationship with me, it will be built on visits, on phone calls, on holidays, not on me feeding, housing, and absorbing this respect from you and your wife. Tiffany opened her mouth and closed it when I held up a hand. And if you, Tiffany, truly grasp what you did, you'll take this as the mercy it is, I added. You could be leaving today. You're not. I am giving you time and some money to land on your feet. But I am not giving you back the illusion that you can do whatever you like to me and still sleep under my roof like nothing happened. The room was heavy with their breathing.
my grandson's quiet sobs, Tiffany's sniffling. "We'll figure something out," he finally muttered, wiping his face. "We don't have a choice, I guess." "You have lots of choices," I said softly. "You're just finally also feeling the consequences of them. That's what a real lesson looks like." That was the climax. Not just them on the floor, but me, finally, sitting upright in my own armchair, holding the pen and the keys, choosing a version of love that didn't require me to shrink. For once, the loudest voice in the room wasn't the one telling me where my place was. It was my own, saying, "This is my place. You will learn to respect it, or you will learn to leave it."
In the days after that living room showdown, the house felt like a waiting room. Not the cozy, familiar home I'd built, but a space in between. Their boxes slowly filling in the spare room, my notice letter taped neatly to the fridge, the calendar on the wall marked with a little red X over the date 60 days out. We moved around each other more carefully. There were fewer barbed comments, less door slamming, but not because they'd suddenly become saints, because now, for the first time, they understood there was something real at stake. Tiffany stopped rearranging my things. My casserole dish stayed in the kitchen. My scarf hung where I left it. She'd pass me in the hallway and mumble, "Morning," without the edge she'd had before. My son, he looked tired, scared in a way that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the math he was doing in his head. New rent, deposits, bills that couldn't be smoothed over with "Mom's got it." It would have been easy, watching him rub his temples over Craigslist listings, to cave. That old instinct rose up every time I heard him sigh, this urge to say, "Never mind, you can stay, we'll forget it." That's the curse of single mothers. We've spent so long being the net that we forget we don't have to fling ourselves under every fall. One evening, I found him alone at the kitchen table, laptop open, hands over his face. I poured myself some tea, sat down across from him. "How's the apartment hunt?" I asked. He dropped his hands and gave a humorless laugh. "Depressing," he said. "We can't afford anything decent near here. We're looking at some places further out." He hesitated. We appreciate that you offered to help with the first month, but after that," I nodded. "After that, you'll do what every other adult does," I said gently. "You cut back, you budget, you hustle, you figure it out." He looked at me like he wanted to say something sharp, then deflated. "You make it sound so simple," he muttered. "Simple doesn't mean easy," I replied. "If anyone knows that, it's me." We sat in silence for a moment. Then he glanced at my hair. "The cut looks good on you, by the way," he said, almost shy. "Better than what we did." It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall of defensiveness. "Thank you," I said. "The difference is, this one was my choice." As move-out day got closer, the house slowly transformed. Their framed wedding photos came down from the hallway. The mountain of shoes by the front door shrank. I watched them carry boxes out to the car, pots they'd bought, their fancy coffee machine, stacks of clothes that had always lived in my closet more than theirs. Each trip tugged at a different part of me. Pride that they were finally going. Sorrow that it had come to this, anger that it had taken something as ugly as that haircut to make me protect myself. On the last morning, they stood in the living room one final time, the space bare where their big TV had hung.
Tiffany looked smaller without her armor of cruelty. Her hair was scraped back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. "Thank you for the help," she said, not quite meeting my gaze. "For the first month and everything." "You're welcome. I hope you use it well." My son hugged me, holding on longer than he had in months. "I'm sorry, Mom, for real this time, not just because we're leaving." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I know," I said quietly. "I believe you're sorry. I also believe that being sorry doesn't undo what happened. That's why you're still leaving." He pulled back, eyes wet. "Do you think, can we ever be like we were?" he asked. I smiled, a little sadly. "We can't go backwards," I said, "but we can try to build something new. Visits, phone calls, dinner at your place instead of mine." I touched his cheek. "You'll always be my son. That doesn't mean you always get to be my roommate." When they closed the door behind them, car packed to the brim, the silence that followed was different from the tense quiet of the weeks before. It was full, somehow. Mine. I walked through the house, fingers grazing the backs of chairs, the tops of picture frames. In my bedroom, I untied my scarf and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back had shorter hair and deeper lines than the one who'd signed her whole life over to a man just because he shared her DNA, but her eyes were clearer. Over the next few weeks, I reclaimed things in small ways. I moved back into the master bedroom, not because I needed the space, but because I realized I'd shrunk myself into that smaller room as a way of making them comfortable. I put my favorite quilt on the bed, the one my own mother had pieced together when I was a girl. I cleared their leftover aesthetic knickknacks off the mantel and replaced them with pictures that made me smile. My grandbaby's gap-toothed grins, my sisters, my girlfriends from church. I invited my oldest daughter over for dinner, and for the first time in months, cooked in my kitchen without someone hovering, critiquing my seasoning. "About time this place felt like you again," she said, looking around. "You should have kicked him out when you first told me she called you old-fashioned." I shook my head. "I had to get there myself. I don't listen well to being told what to do either, you know." We laughed, the sound echoing off walls that had held too much arguing. It wasn't all tidy, of course. Word got around the family. Some relatives said I'd been harsh. "You kicked your own son out over hair?" they'd tut. I didn't waste breath explaining the years of small cuts that had come before the big one. The people that mattered had seen enough to understand. My pastor came by with a pie and a simple affirmation. "Honor your parents doesn't just go one way," he said. "Sometimes boundaries are the most loving thing you can do for a grown child who's forgotten where he came from." Mark called a few times from the new apartment. At first, it was logistics, questions about bills forwarded, mail, recipes. Over time, the tone softened. "Mom, you were right," he admitted one night. "Rent is no joke. We're budgeting now. Tiffany picked up an extra shift at the salon. I got a promotion at work because I'm actually staying late instead of assuming you'd have dinner waiting." I let him vent, offer advice only when he asked. That was part of our new boundary, too. I wasn't going to insert myself uninvited. Months later, he invited me to their place for dinner. "We want to show you what we've done," he said. I went. The apartment was small but neat, their own curtains on the windows, their own couch dented in the shape of their lives. Tiffany opened the door with her hair tied up in a scarf, not much like the ones I'd been wearing. She looked softer. "Hi, Mom," she said, and for the first time, it didn't sound like a performance. At the table, she kept glancing at my hair like she wanted to say something about it.
Finally, as we were washing dishes together, she blurted, "I really am sorry, you know, about what I did. It wasn't about your hair. It was about feeling small. And instead of talking about that, I made you smaller so I could feel bigger. It was ugly. I see that now." I rinsed a plate, handed it to her. "I know it wasn't about hair," I said. "That's why I couldn't just get over it. But I appreciate you saying that, really saying it." She admitted, "I never had a mom who stood up for herself. Mine just swallowed everything, and then one day she left without telling anyone. I guess I thought if I didn't get ahead of being hurt, I'd end up like her." I sighed. "And I never had anyone show me it was okay to say, 'Enough,' even to your own child. So I waited until I'd let it go too far. We're both learning." The resolution between us wasn't some Hallmark freeze frame with hugs and tears and instant forgiveness. It was slower than that, clunkier. It looked like me visiting them every few weeks instead of seeing them every day under strain. It looked like her asking, "Do you like your tea this way?" instead of assuming. It looked like my son stepping in when she made a stray comment about age and saying, "Babe, that's not fair," before I even had to. Back at my house, the days flowed differently. Quieter, yes, but also lighter. The fear that lived in the back of my mind, that I was trapped with them until I died, that my last years would be a slow erosion of my self-respect, started to fade. Neighbors would ask, "Aren't you lonely now? The kids moved out?" I'd smile and say, "Sometimes, but I'd rather be lonely in my
Own your space than crowded in someone else's disrespect. And yet, there were moments of sweetness I wouldn't trade. Like the Sunday my son showed up alone with a grocery bag, sheepish grin on his face. "Tiff's working today," he said. "Thought I'd bring you some things and spend time, just us." We cooked together, him chopping vegetables while I told him stories of my own mother I'd never shared. At one point, he paused, knife in midair, and said, "I get it now, why you were so mad. If anyone touched my kid when I wasn't looking, I'd burn the world down." I laughed. "Took you long enough," I said. "But I'm glad you got there before you had kids of your own." That was the heart of the resolution for me. Not that everything went back to the way it was, but that the balance shifted. I stopped being the default giver. He stopped seeing my sacrifices as endless and costless. And my daughter-in-law stopped seeing me as competition and started, slowly, seeing me as an example of a woman who could be both loving and firm. The house stayed mine, on paper and in spirit. My will stayed as we'd rewritten it. I didn't change it back even as things improved. Because forgiveness doesn't mean handing the keys back to the person who once locked you out of your own room. It means letting go of the hope that the past will be different and building new choices on what you know now. The night before my next birthday, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, running my fingers through my short hair, now grown into a style I'd come to love. I thought back to that morning on the couch, to the sting of scissors and my son's words. Then I thought about that living room 3 days later, about my own words. I am forcing you to live your lives. In the end, that's what the resolution really was. Not revenge, not exile, an invitation to them and to myself to finally grow up. For a long time, I wore mother like armor and chains at the same time. It was the title that kept me moving when I wanted to give up,
but it was also the excuse I used to let people chip away at me. "That's my son," I'd say every time he took a little more of my time, my patience, my space. "That's my son," I said when I signed every line of that first will, handing him everything without asking what he'd do with it. I didn't realize until I woke up with my hair on the floor that I'd handed over more than assets. I had, piece by piece, handed over my right to be treated like a full human being in my own house. When he stood there, looking at the hair he'd watched me comb his whole childhood, and said, "You needed a lesson, Mom," what he was really saying was, "Your feelings don't matter as much as our comfort." That cut deeper than any scissors. The truth is, he wasn't entirely wrong that someone needed a lesson. He just didn't understand who the student really was. That's the part I want other mothers, especially those of us who've done it alone, to hear. We are so used to being the ones teaching patience and forgiveness and let it go that we forget we're allowed to change the lesson plan. Your child becoming an adult doesn't freeze you in time as some endless source of resources and apologies. You're allowed to let your love grow up too. From "I'll rescue you" to "I'll respect you enough to let you stand on your own, and I'll respect myself enough to move out of the way if you won't." Throwing them out 3 days after that haircut would have been about revenge. Giving them 2 months and a starter check while still changing the will and the dynamic was about responsibility. To them, to me, to the girl I used to be before life taught me that being nice was safer than being clear. People will say, "It was just hair," or "You broke up your household over pride." Those people haven't spent years shrinking so someone else can feel big in a space you paid for. They haven't had their body altered without consent as a joke, then been told to stop being dramatic. Hair grows back. What doesn't grow back easily is respect once you've told someone again and again that you'll swallow anything to keep them close. The day I changed my will and taped that notice to the fridge, I wasn't punishing my son. I was finally refusing to punish myself for loving him. That's the real lesson I learned. Love without boundaries turns you into furniture. Useful, taken for granted, easy to lean on, and harder to notice when it's cracking. Love with boundaries can look harsh from the outside, like, how could she do that to her own child? But from the inside, it feels like oxygen, like the first real breath you've taken in a crowded room in years. If there's a takeaway in all this, it's not cut people out the second they hurt you. It's pay attention to who still thinks you're a person when they're angry. My son and his wife showed me, in scissors and in words, that when push came to shove, they believed teaching me my place was more important than honoring the woman who'd given them a place to live. Once they showed me that clearly, it stopped being about one argument. It became a question I wish I'd asked sooner. If I died tomorrow, would I be leaving my life's work to people who see my worth, or to people who only see my benefits? You're allowed to ask yourself that no matter how old you are or how grown your children are. You're allowed to change your mind based on the answer. In the end, my son thought he was handing out a lesson with that haircut. That I was too proud, too opinionated, too unwilling to know my place. What came next taught him something different. That my place is not under his roof, or his wife's scissors, or anyone else's thumb. My place is in the center of the life I built, with people around me who remember that mom is not just a role that serves them. It's a human being with history, limits, and the right to decide which lessons stick.